Hello, boxing fans around the world. Thank you once again for joining us on Talking Fight for another episode featuring Christian from the Friday night panel. And we're talking about the Olympics, and specifically we're talking about boxing at the Olympics, which are just now a few short weeks away. What did you find out for us today, Christian?
We are in the home stretch, Graham, as you know, and as we get closer and closer to these games, we keep hearing more and more from the Olympic organizers on what these games are going to look like and new decisions that they're making on what people can and can't do with respect to the actual both their conduct at the games and who can and can't physically be at the games. Most recently, as of just yesterday, Olympic organizers have said that it's highly unlikely that breastfeeding moms are going to be allowed to bring their children to the Tokyo Games. So an International Olympic Committee spokesman has said that it is highly unlikely that what they're calling unaccredited people from overseas, which would include infants and caregivers, will be granted entry into Japan for the Games. Now, a Tokyo 2020 organizing committee spokesperson said, in part, following discussions with the IOC, it has basically been decided to give up on allowing athletes, family members, and other companions to accompany them to the Games. In the statement, the organizing committee left itself a little bit of leeway for some last-minute amendments to the policy, saying there may be special circumstances, particularly with regard to infant children, and we will therefore continue to consult with the IOC and the IPC to solicit opinions from other relevant parties. It said multiple Olympians with young children are now preparing, though, to be without them for Tokyo. Organizers, as you guys already know, have barred spectators, foreign spectators, reduced delegation sizes as part of a complex plan to keep COVID-19 out of the Olympics. Athletes' parents and partners won't be allowed at the games unless they are also serving what they're calling an accredited role. So if that partner or parent was also a coach or a trainer, for example, or a nutritionalist as part of the delegation, they would be allowed to attend. But just being related isn't enough to get you past immigration these days in Japan. So mothers have been pushing for an exception to these rules. An example is Alfine Tuliamak, who's a U.S. Olympic marathon runner who qualified for the games last February and then decided to have a child once the games were postponed, asked the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee if her 5-month-old daughter and fiance would be able to accompany her to Japan. Canadian basketball player Kim Goucher, who gave birth in March, has pleaded with organizers for an exemption as well. American soccer star Alex Morgan has said that she was hoping to bring her 1-year-old daughter Charlie. So the IOC has said that a small number of national Olympic committees have been dealing with requests from athletes to bring their children on a case-by-case basis. Now, the USOPC, that's the Olympic and Paralympic Committee, received Tuliamak's request and then made a request on her behalf to the Tokyo Organizing Committee. A USOPC official said the Organizing Committee, citing COVID countermeasures, denied that request. So as it sits right now, again, they've left themselves a little bit of leeway, but as it sits right now, new mothers, athletes who are new mothers, are going to be unable to bring their children with them, regardless of whether or not they're currently breastfeeding or not. So just one more layer of complexity added to an otherwise already incredibly complex games that's going on. So we'll see if anything comes of this, and we'll let you guys know if any exemptions are made closer to the games. But as it sits right now, they are making no family members, no exceptions at this point, with obviously the exception being if you are an accredited person, an official member of the delegation. Moving on, though, our next story today involves International Boxing Association's new president, Umar Kremlev. I know we talk about him a lot, but he is confident that his beleaguered organization will be welcomed back to the Olympic family after these Tokyo Games. So Umar Kremlev said at a news conference on Monday in Switzerland that AIBA is continuing to implement the changes necessary to get back into the good graces of the International Olympic Committee. And he still expects the sport's governing body to return to the Olympic fold before the Paris Games in just a little over 3 years' time now. The IOC, on their part, though, has not recently commented on the progress made by AIBA, which they suspended back in 2019. Now, a boxing tournament has been held at the Olympics, every Olympiad since Summer Olympics, that is, since 1920. But the sport's place in the Olympic program was in question when the IOC, tired of AIBA's scandals and questionable business practices under then President Ching Kuo, who resigned in 2017. So an IOC task force, as you guys again know, is now being led for this particular Olympics by gymnastics executive Morinari Watanabe. And that's going to be running through the end of this games, but they obviously don't want to be doing this again if they can avoid it. So Kremlin has said, our position is that we are to become one of the best federations, so there will simply be no reason to exclude us. You just have to look at how boxing is developing and completing reforms and putting a full stop to the past. It will be for the IOC, though, to judge our results. Kremlin won an election to take charge of AIBA last December, and he has been an outspoken in his criticism of the organization's past bosses, vowing to establish a new level of transparency in everything from the business practices of the organization to judges' decisions of the notorious governing body. He went on, unfortunately, we have a bad heritage, it's true. To put it mildly, our past is not that good, which I think is putting it quite mildly. Now, Kremlin won this election partly by vowing to eliminate AIBA's debts, which swelled while Wu's administration attempted to build that organization into a force in professional boxing. Last month, AIBA announced that it had repaid much of the criticized 8-figure loan taken from an Azeri company early in Wu's tenure to create the now defunct World Series of Boxing, which was intended to be a team-based professional boxing league. Roy Jones Jr., who you guys all know, the American boxer whose scandalous loss at the '88 Seoul Games, which is considered to be one of the worst judging decisions in Olympic sport, was in attendance at that news conference to support Kremlin's reforms. Jones was quoted as saying, "All of my efforts are to make sure that this doesn't happen to another 19-year-old, because for me, the damage is done. Even if I get my gold medal, it's not like I got it at the ceremony. Hearing your national anthem being played and knowing that you sacrificed 9 years of your life, and it was worth it." AIBA Secretary General Istvan Kovac and Kremlin both mentioned, now this is the interesting part here, at this press conference, they floated the idea of possibly moving to yet another scoring system, but refused to provide any details on what that might look like. So Jones also went on to say that he personally favors a return of headgear in men's fights after the Wu administration removed the protective gear just before the Rio Games. So we're going to be watching this one. I don't think we're going to see necessarily a return to the headgear coming back for the men anytime soon. But I'm especially interested in what they might be floating as far as more rule changes for judging and refereeing, and going to yet another point scoring system, which is going to be a little different again. You guys obviously know, just as a quick recap, the old point scoring system was not computer based. It was 3 judges, not 5, just scoring punches as they saw, and it was really, really subjective. Whereas now we have 5 judges, and the computer randomly assigns 3 of those 5 judges for scores. Those scores are now announced at the end of every single round, not at the end of the actual fight. And certain timelines and regulations have now been put into place to give time for formal complaints and audits and reviews of those fights. So we'll see how that goes. Again, if anything does come of this new scoring or new refereeing or judging, obviously we're going to be the first ones to let you know that. I'll be keeping an ear to the ground on that one. Moving along, though, MC Mary Kom, 6-time world champion, has now changed her travel plans for the upcoming Tokyo Olympics to avoid the added travel restrictions imposed by the Tokyo Games Organizing Committee. And she will now be joining the en route Indian Olympic boxing team in Italy. And Graham, I think you mentioned something about this story a little earlier on, or the possibility of it on one of the days that I wasn't able to be here, if memory serves.
Yep.
So that has moved forward. She will be joining them now. She was quoted as saying, "I have changed my plans. I've returned to New Delhi, and I will leave for Italy maybe tomorrow or the day after. There are stricter quarantine restrictions on those who are traveling from India, and I want to avoid them." So the 38-year-old was training at the Pune Army Sports Institute up until this point, and she is now set to join her fellow Indian boxers in Assisi, where they have been training for some time now. So Mary Kom emphasized how quarantine isolation period can break her training rhythm and momentum. And she believes that all the hard work and training will amount to nothing if she goes through a hard quarantine. Personal coach Choti Lal Yadav and a physiotherapist will also be accompanying her to Italy. Currently, India and 10 other countries have faced stricter rules and regulations leading up to the Tokyo Games by the Japanese government. However, athletes traveling from other training bases like Italy are not bound by those rules. So Olympic athletes from India, for example, as of yesterday, we were just talking about this, are now required to take daily COVID-19 tests for a solid week before they're bound for Tokyo. They also have been asked not to have any direct contact with anyone from any other country. Now, this all has a lot to do with the fact that they are traveling directly from India. This is not necessarily the boxers, but the entire delegation at that point in time is under these much stricter guidelines. Whereas if they're coming in from Italy and they have been in Italy for X amount of days, long enough to constitute a quarantine beforehand, they would be subject to the same rules as the Italians going into Tokyo, which would be a much less stringent rules and markers that they have to hit before they're allowed entry into the country. So the Japanese government has been giving some relaxation to athletes for medical updates online, but they have so far refused a request from the Indian Olympic Association to the Tokyo Games Committee regarding the relaxation in COVID-19 testing protocols. It had stated that it would take a huge logistical toll on athletes and their travel preparations for Tokyo, not counting the ones who are in Italy, obviously. Indian Olympic boxing contingent was training in Assisi earlier this month and was expected originally to return to India on the 10th of July, followed by their obviously final trip to Tokyo for the Olympics. So the team now is going to be staying in Italy and traveling directly to Italy from Tokyo. Kom had originally opted to stay and train in India in the lead up to the games, simply citing personal reasons for why she wasn't going to Italy. Obviously, she's changed her plans now, and that's where she's headed. But that's what we've got today, Graham, taking a quick look around the rings.
That's awesome. Great recap. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And it's going to be a busy day for us. I know we have a lot of meetings scheduled. So thanks very much. We'll see you tomorrow. And what is tomorrow? Tomorrow? Wednesday.
Thursday.
Hump day.
Wednesday.
Good stuff.
I'll be here.
All right, thanks. Thanks again, Christian. We'll see you tomorrow.
Or we might still be here tomorrow. It's hard to say if our producer doesn't wake up at some point in time.
Wait.